Hey, it is our fifth Sunday, and so on our fifth Sunday, a couple things happen. We're blessed with Daryl leading us on this particular Sunday, so thank you for that. And also, it means that our kids are upstairs in church with us. Actually, that happens on the last Sunday of every month. The kids join us in service, and so, because of that, I usually try to find a way to include them in the service and ask them to participate in some questions that I like to ask them. So I'm going to ask all the kids. They would come and just kind of sit around like here we've done before, sit right up here in the front. I have some questions. I want to interview Jackson, and I want to interview Solomon and all these people, Michaela, and all these kids are going to come and talk to me for a minute. And I think you might like this topic, and maybe your parents will find some insight about this. We're going to talk to you about how you feel when you're told no. Uh-oh. What do you think about that? Some of you are already giggling because you know you've been told no before, huh? So when you are told no, like, have you ever asked your parents if you could just eat gobs and gobs of candy? What would they say? What would they say, Solomon, if you said, Dad, can I just have 5 pounds of candy?
No.
No, I'd say no. Have you said, Dad, can I have the keys to the car yet? Have you said that yet, Sydney? No. What would he say?
I don't know. Maybe yes or no.
How old are you?
10.
10? He'd say maybe yes? He would say maybe yes or no?
No.
He would say no, wouldn't he? How do you guys feel when you're told, come on up, girls, you can sit here if you want. You don't have to, but you can join us. How do you feel, what do you feel like when your parents say no to you? What's something they've told you no about lately?
About you can watch YouTube or eat candies, everything. Parents say no.
Yeah. Have you asked for a cell phone yet? And what has your mom said when you asked if you could have a cell phone?
No.
No. And how does that make you guys feel when you get told no? What was it, Jackson?
Angry. Sad.
Sad, because you want this stuff, right? We want what we want, right? Like you want to be able to stay out all night and not have any bedtime, right? Wouldn't that be a cool thing?
No.
What was that? Say it again.
I hate bedtime.
All right, Darren and Karen, she hates bedtime. So when you say, Mom, can I stay up? What does she say?
No.
No. So do you like the word no? Now, what if she said, what if you said, Mom, do I have to do homework? And she said no. Would you like that? Oh, then you'd like to be told no, wouldn't you? Mom, do I have to eat all my vegetables? And she said no. Yay. Okay, how about that? Mom, do I have to go to bed? She says no. Yay, you like that answer, don't you? Yeah. So sometimes you don't like it when Mom says no or Dad says no, right? And sometimes you do like it when Mom says, Mom, Dad, do I have to clean the garage today? That's what Jackson says. And he says no, because we're not in the garage yet. And so you don't have to clean. You don't have to do that. Do I have to clean my room? And they say no. Of course, they never say no. But they always want you to clean your room, right? So have you ever asked God for something and he said no? What was it? Do you remember?
No eating a lot of candy.
Oh, God said that to you? Oh, okay. Anybody else? Have you ever prayed for something and God said no? You don't know yet, huh? Maybe the things you're praying for, he says yes to already. So, well, today we're going to talk about how you feel sometimes when not necessarily our parents say no, but when God tells us no. And we've already discovered, haven't we, that sometimes no is not such a fun thing, is it? It's kind of a bummer, kind of a drag. But sometimes God says no to us, and it's really a good thing because he knows what's best for us, right? So when your parents tell you, hey, no, you can't have all that candy, it's because they know that your teeth will fall out and you'll have to eat everything with your gums the rest of your life. And yeah, some of your teeth fall out. Look at that, you're missing one. And sometimes your parents tell you, no, you can't play in the street because it's dangerous, right? And sometimes your parents say, no, you really shouldn't have the bow and arrow, but grandma says you can. And that's a whole different story for a whole other time. Jackson. So, all right, you guys, so we're going to talk about how it feels like when God tells us no. And he sometimes tells that to you guys at your age, because you can talk to him too, right? You can talk to God whenever you want, right? And you ask for stuff. So sometimes when he tells you no, we're going to talk about that today. And sometimes it's hard to accept that and hard to go, okay, God. And sometimes it's best for us. One last response.
When I asked Mommy that when we were all at my grandma's house, and I asked Mommy that can we play outside, and she said no, and my grandma said yes.
Uh-oh, Karen. I don't know what to do about that. Well, All right, you guys. So I thank you for your answers and your help. It's a good answers and good help. You guys go sit back with your parents, so we're going to talk some more about what happens when God says no to us. Okay, go sit down. I think you may have some cleanup to do, parents, after that conversation. At least your grandparents might be in a little bit of trouble. If you have a Bible this morning, turn to John chapter 5, where we're going today, John 5. We're going to begin a series of sermons that will allow us to think about and talk about our responses or God's responses and commands from Him. We'll be exploring today this thought when God says no. Because occasionally He does that, doesn't He? I was thinking as we sang these songs today about the cross, and Daryl chose them because he loves them and because we also knew that Paul loved them as well. Thinking about that oftentimes we do hear a no from God, and as we sang those songs about the cross, we even recognize that Jesus was even told no. In his final hours when he was in the garden praying, and he said to himself, or prayed to God, and he said, Father, if this could go any other way, if you could release me from this obligation to carry the weight of the world, the sin of the world in my life, if you could release me from that, then that would be great. And God said no. Even Jesus was told no, and so today we're going to talk about how we feel and what we think about when God says no, and then in a couple weeks we'll return to this sermon series. We're going to talk about things like when God says wait, because we don't wait well. If you're like me, I'm not very patient. We're going to look at a series of a sermon that says when God says stop. God says stop running or stop doing or stop being. And we're going to talk about when God says turn around and when God says go, and that'll be in the next several weeks. But today we're going to talk for a moment about the same question we asked the kids. How does it make you feel when you're told no? Usually the response carries some sort of negative tone or negative connotation with it, like the kids were not very happy when they said, Mom and Dad, can I have more candy? Mom and Dad, can I stay up late? Mom and Dad, can I go play in the street? And we say no. They're not always real thrilled with that answer, are they? And as adults, we don't always like that answer either. No, you didn't get the job. No, you didn't get the raise. No, he or she won't go out with you, or no, he or she won't go to the dance with you. No, you didn't qualify. No, you're not getting better. No to whatever we pray and hear a no response to. Sometimes the no is for good things. No, you don't have to work late. Or you hear from your doctor, no, you don't have blank. Fill in the blank. No, your child is in trouble. No, you're not going to get a ticket. No, whatever. Sometimes we like the response no. All of us who have children have gone through that learning curve of teaching our children what no means and then convincing them that they have to follow the no that we tell them. The earliest of toddlers, I remember my kids now, they're let me get this straight, they're almost 23, 19, and 17, and since they were the littlest of toddlers, it was interesting to watch how quickly they learn no. I would guess the youngest baby in here, I think, is Everly, and I would bet that you would tell us that Everly is already even maybe starting to understand no. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe she's too young. I don't know. I bet you Elizabeth Bush knows what no means. She's maybe, or other kids that are about that early birth to 2 years age. Isn't it fascinating to see how quickly they begin to understand no and how quickly they respond in a dissatisfied manner to that term? As they go on and they grow, that frustration grows in a different kind of ways. When they are the kids' age that we're sitting up here mostly, that turns into tears and wailing and gnashing of teeth and crying and temper tantrums, usually appropriately in the middle of the grocery store on the floor. As adolescents and teens, the response to no brings out intense negotiations and arguments, maybe a little back talk if they can somehow think they can get away with it. It's interesting how adamant we are when we want our children to listen and respond correctly and how understand no. I remember asking my kids when I would tell them no, I would say, what's more confusing to you, the N or the O? They didn't think that was very funny. And not only did they not like the response no, they wanted an explanation as to why was I being told no. My grandmother used to say, to make little boys like you ask why. And we understand that, and we've all gone through that. Those of you who have raised children, or maybe you're still raising children, you understand this scale you're on as it changes and grows when we're telling our children no. But isn't it interesting as adults, we don't often respond very well to no. We don't like it either. Now, sometimes we do break down and have a meltdown or a temper tantrum with God or with our spouse or with whoever we're with. Sometimes anger builds and frustration builds up inside of us. And no is a common response that we hear as well that we don't like as well, and we struggle to accept it, and often don't like it any better than the kids. No seems like a letdown. No seems like rejection. No seems like a failure. No, I can't. No, I didn't. No, I won't. No, I don't want blank. And sometimes no even feels like abandonment. We ask for something, we're told no, and somehow we feel even more alone than we did before we were asking. And no doubt there have been times in your life when you ask God for something or for Him to do something, and He has said no. Today we're talking about our reaction to that situation. And sometimes when we are told no by God, just like our children, we still go ahead and do whatever we wanted to do that we asked about anyway, and find ourselves in a whole lot of trouble. Or sometimes we don't even wait for the answer because we're told, or we know we'll be told no. But every single time, and we'll discover this as we go on today, every single time God tells us no, it's not because He's a big, mean, nasty God who wants to punish us or doesn't like us or we're in trouble for something or we didn't believe enough or we didn't say enough or we didn't do enough. Every time God tells us no, it's because He has something better or His best in store for us, and we'll discover that today. I may have told you this story, and if I have, just please bear with me, but I'll tell it again because it fits well here with this illustration. When we graduated Bible college in 1995, we were both graduates of school. I had a pastoral and youth ministry degree. Sonia had a Christian education and a missionary degree. And so here we were with school loans, a child on the way. This was June of 95. Christian was born in November, and nowhere to go. No job prospects. And everybody, when you're in Bible college, you're probably in college of any kind, the thought is you're increasingly getting closer to graduation. Well, what are you going to do with the graduate degree or the degree you've gotten now? You've spent the last 4 years of your life here. You've spent all this money, or you've borrowed all this money, or however you've gotten here. And now what are you going to do? Where's your job? Where are you going? Where did you land? Have you got any resumes out? Has any church called you? And for us, our setting was a church context. Do you have a youth ministry place somewhere? Are you going to be missionaries? Are you going to be pastors somewhere? We didn't know. And we'd send out resume after resume after resume, and every time God kept saying no. And so, suddenly, one day, her former youth pastor calls us. Happened to be the man that also married us. And he calls us and he says, hey, I'm going down to Sacramento, California. I had no desire to live in California. Frankly, still don't. But he called me and said, hey, you want to go to Sacramento, California? And I'll help you move down there. We'll cover your moving costs. You come down and help us restart a church. Oh, well, boy, we've got an offer and we've got some expenses covered. It must be God. So away we went. And I'll shorten the story by quickly telling you that within the first 2 weeks, we knew we were wrong. We knew we had jumped the gun. We didn't even wait for God to say no. We just labeled what we thought were signs from God as yes. Within the first 2 weeks, we knew we had messed up. We knew we were wrong. We tarried there for 4 months, and by October 1st, we were back. In fact, just this time, 1995, October 1st, tomorrow, we landed back in Eugene, Oregon, learning our lesson about rushing God and not accepting a no or not waiting for His no. Today, we're going to look at two different stories, both of which have instances where God said no. Now, from the outset, I'll admit that sometimes we don't know why God says no. There isn't ever an explanation. We just have to accept we don't know why. We simply don't have a good answer for why He didn't or doesn't say yes. In those situations, trust has to settle into our hearts and minds. Trusting that God really does know better than I do. And if we submit to the no, then we're also trusting that God has His best in store for us later on to come. So we're going to start by looking at a story in John chapter 5. And you might look at this story and say, well, I don't understand why you chose that story because the man was healed. God did say yes. But we'll dive into a minute and see if you see what I saw when I studied this passage of Scripture and see if it applies to us together today. John chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 colored colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been there in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool where the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." A whole other picture for a whole other sermon. Don't get caught up in that. But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.' So they asked him, 'Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?' The man who was healed had no idea who he was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, 'See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you.' The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well." Stop there. You look at this story and you say, "Wait a minute, Jim. There wasn't a no." I mean, other than the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders who were being a pain in the necks and saying they were more caught up in, "Oh, you're working on the Sabbath," than the fact that this man who they had seen at the pool for 38 years is now walking past them. That wasn't the no. When we look at the context of what was going on, you'll see the no. This is the setting. Jesus returns to Jerusalem and he comes across this pool called Bethesda. And here's how the pool would work. By John's own account, a great many disabled people lay or sat or were gathered around the pool. The blind, the lame, the disabled were there. All with the desire and the hope and the dreams that their prayers for healing would be answered. And they gathered around the pool because the pool had become a place of healing for them. And what they believed was this, that an angel of the Lord would come down and would stir the waters of some sort, would ripple the waters out, and that was an indication to them that the healing properties of God, the healing power of God was present, and they could be healed if they responded to that stirring. And so when the water stirred, someone had to get up, and the first person into the water, I know this sounds corny and weird and strange, and I don't know why God does things the way he does things, this is the way he did it, but the truth of the belief was that the first person into the water after the angel of the Lord had stirred the waters would be healed. So here we find all of these people, this great number of blind, lame, and paralyzed people, all trying to get to the pool at the same time to be the first one, all seeking healing. And John tells us that Jesus encountered this man who had been an invalid for 38 years. It's a long time. For 38 years, he had laid by that pool trying to be healed. And Jesus comes along and says to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Which is an odd question in itself, and he asks it simply because sometimes people get caught up in living their own struggle and don't see any way out of it, and so they're stuck in it. So he asks him the question. Of course, the man wants to be healed. For 38 years, he's wanted to be healed, and so Jesus heals him. For 38 years, he's prayed and been told no. Now, when I have a prayer that's a serious and a life-changing prayer that I desperately want God to answer, I'm not praying once a year. I'm not praying twice a year. Frankly, I'm praying 365 times a year, sometimes more than that even. A daily prayer this man had prayed. For 13,870 days he had prayed and been told no. That's some trust in God. When you've been told no, and we're going to assume that he prayed daily. So simply follow along with me and assume that he prayed for 38 years every single day, and for 13,870 times God said no. But don't miss the fact that he kept praying. He kept by the pool expecting that God would heal him until today. Now you might say, well, he really couldn't go anywhere else. He's a lame guy. Somebody would have had to carry him off. Okay, maybe. But we know two things. Number one, he didn't go anywhere else. He didn't ask him to take anybody else to take him anywhere else. And number two, he couldn't get in the pool. But rather than say to Jesus, well, sure, I'd pretty much given up on it, but I'm here now, and you're here now, so if you can heal me. And notice, interestingly enough, he didn't even know who it was that asked him the question. That's a whole other sermon for a whole other time, that you would trust someone who would ask you such a poignant question that's so pivotal in your life that he would trust him. When Jesus asked him if he wants to get well, he basically says, well, yeah, I'd love to be well, but I can't get in the pool, and no one's here to help me. I'm sort of stuck. And at that moment, Jesus heals him. He'd been waiting for 38 years. He dreamed and hoped and prayed about this moment, and now it's here. For 38 years, he'd been told no. Now, I bet if I was to stop and ask you, how many of you have had a prayer that you have been prayed, maybe not for 38 years, but maybe 30 years or 8 years or a serious length of time, and God has told you no, and you're still praying it, some of your hands would go up. No hadn't deterred this man from wanting to be well, and no hadn't deterred him from seeking his wellness in the pool from God. Now, the other thing we can observe in this situation, when we read the text in the context of what was going on around this man of 38 years, was that there were a great number of disabled people there. Now, I don't know why, and we don't have any record of this, but as I began to picture this in my mind's eye, if you're like me, when you read a story, do you picture the scene unfolding? You kind of see what your mind creates as a picture of this? And you picture a pool with maybe some steps leading into it or around it. There's some tile or some concrete or something. I don't know, this is the way I think of it. And I picture a great number of disabled, lame, blind, paralyzed people there. And John only refers to one. I don't know how many were there. Let's say there were 100 there. I'm just throwing out a number. I have no idea. We don't have an account of it. 100 people there, and out of 100 people, he walked past 99 and said no. Imagine for a moment if we all have a prayer in this room, and you probably do. If I said, what is something you're praying about right now that you want healing for or deliverance from or God's rescue in or whatever the situation is, every hand would probably go up and say, yes, I need God to do this. And imagine for a moment if Jesus walked in, and he walked up to Jim Bell, and he was the only one he healed. Out of all of us, roughly 100 of us, he's the only one. To everyone else, he said no. If there had been a mass healing of a great number of people, I think John would have recorded it. I'm just speculating, but I think he would have recorded that. We would have known that. Would have been a noteworthy moment. And I don't know why Jesus didn't heal everyone. He could have clapped his hands, wiggled his nose, snapped his fingers, done whatever he wanted, just spoke the words, everyone be healed, and they all would have been healed. But he had an encounter with one man who had heard the word no for 38 years and finally was healed, finally was delivered. We've all prayed for things for a long, long time. We've all prayed for healing for lots of different things. Lots of people we've cared about and loved. You all know, or most all of you know, about our son Alex, and we've prayed for healing for Alex for years. We've prayed for speech, that he would speak a word. We've prayed for healing from autism, healing from seizures. We prayed for the simplest of achievements in life to be happening in his life. For all kinds of things. For us, Alex is one of those great number of people laying beside the pool that Jesus walks past. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't think God has chosen not to notice. I do believe he understands and hears our prayers, and he sees our needs. But for a reason greater than I can begin to understand, he chooses to say no. He chooses to say no or not now. Now, don't mistake no for a can't. Just because God says no doesn't mean he can't. Don't doubt that he has the power and the ability to do whatever you're asking him for. So withholding your request, because when we make a request to God, if you're like me, I have an expected or desired answer. God, would you please do this? And I'm praying for this desired answer, my desired answer. But just because God says no doesn't mean he doesn't hear my answer, or he won't, or he can't. He's just saying right now, I'm not going to. Or no, I won't. Because he knows what's best. In these moments we trust. We don't always have an answer. We don't always know why. Alfred Lord Tennyson said, ours is not to reason why, ours but to do and die. Well, Alfred, that's easier said than done, isn't it? Because if I'm really honest, I usually don't like God's no. Because I don't go to him with things that I wouldn't want. Lord, please make me sick. Lord, please take away my job. Lord, please cause my kids to have problems. We don't go to him with those kind of questions, right? We go to him with the prayers and the hopes and the dreams and the requests that are things that would be blessings to us, good things for us. I rarely, if ever, I don't think I've ever asked him for something negative or wrong or hard or worse. So we usually don't like God's no. I don't like his answer that doesn't match my request. I either receive a no or I receive an answer to my request in a different way than I didn't expect or didn't want. I'm asking for God to change a situation, and he doesn't. I'm asking for God to heal a relationship, and he doesn't. I'm asking for God to heal a friend, a child, a spouse, a grandparent, or a relative, and he doesn't. I'm asking for God for a release from a situation, and he doesn't. And we could hypothesize all kinds of situations we could talk about and all kinds of prayers we could make as examples and say, God, would you please do this? And he doesn't. In these moments, we simply have to trust and obey. If he's really the God we believe that he is, if he's really the God that we say that he is based on Scripture, if he's really the God that we follow and we walk with in our lives as Christians and followers of Jesus, if he's really everything we say and everything we believe and everything we profess and everything we teach, then why would a no cause us to abandon him? Why would a no cause us to say, forget it, I'm done? Then we weren't genuinely asking him, we're only upset that we didn't get our way. And like every parent in this room knows, there are moments in life when you have to say, no, you can't. Or no, you're not. Or no, you don't get that. Why? Because we do know what's best for our own children. We can see a broader and bigger picture than they can. We can see what we will protect them from and keep them from. So God does the same with us. The added insight to that is that God can not only see what he protects us from and keeps us from, he also sees what he can do with us if we don't do what he's asking us to do. In these moments, we simply have to trust and obey. That's corny, that's cliche, that's a phrase, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Sure, easier said than done, but still absolutely true. To be at peace with a situation that if we're really honest, we don't like and we would rather have done differently, simply have to trust him. And you've all prayed similar prayers that I've prayed about my Alex. For things and for loved ones with similar situations, and God has said no. For 16 years, we have prayed for God to be healed from autism, or for Alex to be healed from autism. For 16 years, we've asked him to have Alex speak. For 5,840 days, he said no. Maybe it'll take another 8,030 before God says yes. Maybe we'll always hear no, and if that's the case, then my sanity has to come from believing and trusting that God knows better than I do. He has a plan and a purpose for the reason why he's telling me no. When we hear no, we can't always see what God will still do, can we? We get stuck on it. Okay, you said no, well now what? Well great, I better scramble. I better do something. Because God said no, I didn't get the job and I needed the raise and whatever happened and she didn't get healed and he didn't come back and all those things. Well, now what? And we panic and we run. And we try to manufacture all kinds of other answers rather than just simply stopping and saying, okay, God, you said no, so now what? I'm waiting for you. We can't try to orchestrate the situations ourselves to have a desired outcome our way and expect God to still bless it when he's told us no the first time. Just because God didn't do it our way doesn't mean that he still won't do it his way. He understands and sees your question. He understands and hears your prayer. And simply because you didn't get the answer, I didn't get the answer I wanted or hoped for or prayed about, doesn't mean he still won't act and answer our prayer in the way he knows best for us. Let's look at another instance of prayer asked for and a different answer given. John chapter 11, where we're going right now. John 11, if you're familiar with the scripture already, you'll know where we're turning. If not, you'll see it in a moment. I cannot fit 44 verses on the screen, so I'll read them for you, and we'll go through it. I want to read the entire story to you. John 11 is another instance when God said no. Specifically, Jesus said no, but we believe and know throughout what Jesus has told us that he did nothing without consulting his Father first. So although in this particular case Jesus says no, he says no because his Father had first said no. And here we find Mary and Martha responding very much like we would, and we even have when their brother Lazarus becomes sick. And Jesus doesn't answer their prayer like they ask for or expect him to, beginning in verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus says, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." Now wait a minute. When someone in my family is hurting or is sick or someone I care about is struggling or in pain, what do we normally do? We go to that person. We say, "How can we help you? What can we do for you?" How many times did you hear that, Chloe? "What can we do for you?" She'd say, "Do you really want to know? Let me tell you. If you're really, hang on. Do you want?" And we do that. We run to people because we want to support. We want to help. We want to at least, at the very most, pray and say, "God, would you intervene in this situation and change it?" And if there's anything tangible we can do, literal we can do, bring a meal, fix something, provide something, we'll do that. And so we run to that person, sometimes daily, sometimes hourly we're with them. Sometimes to the point of driving them crazy, probably. And yet Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick and says, we'll hang out a couple days and then we'll show up. This is crazy. No, wait a minute, God. We prayed and you're supposed to show up and do something about this. Especially for Mary and Martha. This was their brother. And they knew Jesus and he loved them. But Jesus says, hang on. What you think will be ultimately death really won't be. Hang on. Beginning of verse 8 again. The disciples respond to him when he says, "Let's go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." Reminds me of the song Carmen did. Remember Carmen? He did a cool song about Lazarus. Go home and YouTube it. Lazarus and Carmen. His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us go that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Mary and Martha to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that now, even now, God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Mary answered, "I know he'll rise again at the resurrection at the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Martha in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Notice twice they both said what often we have said to God. "Lord, if you had done something, this wouldn't have happened. Lord, if you had answered the prayer the way I asked, this wouldn't have happened." Verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved, in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see," they replied, and Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Again, stop for a second, the Jews say, "Why didn't he do something about this? Why didn't he answer the prayer? If he can heal a blind man and make him see, why couldn't he keep this guy from dying? Why didn't he do something?" Essentially saying, why did he say no? Find my spot. Pardon me a second. Verse 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Whoa. I almost wonder if he would have finished that conversation was there. Finally, mic drop. There you go. Here we find Mary and Martha reacting in the very same way that we often do to a no. "You let him die. If only you had done something, Jesus. Why didn't you?" And the Jews even get behind her as they're standing there with them at the tomb. "Why didn't he do something? Why couldn't he have healed them? You weren't here, Jesus, and now look what happened. You didn't answer my prayer, God, and now look what happened. You said no, God, and now look what happened." Remember, just because God didn't do it our way doesn't mean that he won't do it his way. Just because God didn't do what we asked doesn't mean he won't act on our behalf. The question is, will we still trust his way? I hope so. When we hear no, we begin to doubt, we begin to question, we begin to fear. What is going on, God? What are you doing? Didn't you hear my prayer? Did I believe enough? Is it my fault? Did I sin? Is that why this happened? And all these thoughts and all these doubts and all these questions flood our minds, and Satan fuels and feeds them. Maybe I didn't pray enough. Maybe I didn't believe enough. Maybe I didn't have just enough faith. Suddenly all these questions flood our minds rather than, "Okay, God, even though I don't like the answer, I'm still trusting you." After Martha points out to Jesus that this wouldn't have happened, her brother wouldn't have died if you had just been here. What are you doing sitting around for 2 days fishing with the guys? Or whatever he was doing. I imagine her frustration, because we've all felt it, haven't we? But then she goes on to say, "But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask." Amazingly, she still trusts him. Her frustration is understandable, and I think Jesus allows for it. He gets it. He understands it. And then she says to him, she reminds him, "By the way, I'm still trusting you. Whatever you ask your Father, I know he'll give it to you." When I read these words, I want to add to Martha's words, "So fix it, Jesus." Don't we? Do whatever you got to do, fix it, because I don't like it. Now, I don't know what would have happened or how they would have felt or what they would have experienced if Jesus said, "No, we're done here," and moved on. "I just came to comfort Mary and Martha. We're done." I don't know why he would have done that or what would have been the outcome of that, but sometimes we hear that. We say, essentially in our hearts and minds, "So fix it, Jesus," and he says, "No, we're done here. We're moving on." And we know, because we just read the story, that Jesus does fix it. He does answer their prayer, just not always the way we expect him to. I know that I'd admit I'd struggle if I was Mary or Martha. I'd be frustrated if it was one of my own children, one of my own relatives, one of my own friends, my own brother. I have struggled with my understanding of God's answer to say not to heal, not to give speech, not to take away seizures, all those things in my own personal life. I don't always get it right, and I don't always like his answer. The only thing that helps my sanity is that after 37 years of walking and talking and following Jesus, I'm learning to trust him a little bit more than I did when I was an 8-year-old. I'm learning to understand that God's ways are bigger than my ways, and I don't always know why. But I just have to trust him. Martha didn't doubt that God could heal him. Martha didn't doubt that Jesus had the power to change the situation. In fact, not only did she expect it prior to Lazarus' death, she emphatically expected it after his death. Jesus, your Father, will answer your cry or your prayer. And Jesus knew that whatever he would pray, his Father would be glorified. Now, why did he linger? If we look back at the story and we dissect it a little bit, why did he wait? So he could display the power of God, we could see. You don't resurrect a sick man, you resurrect a dead man. Now, granted, if he'd have come in and healed him, if he was just sick, and we see instances of that, surely that would have been great. We pray for that all the time. Lord, if you're going to heal him through a doctor or a nurse or medicine or a miracle, we'll take that. And thank you, Jesus, for that. But boy, if he comes in and resurrects a dead man, that's a miracle. That's big news. People are going to talk about that. So we just have to continue to trust him, because remember, just because he said no doesn't mean he can't. The question continues on to say, will you still trust his way? Even when we can't see any logical reason that his plan is better. If there had been texting between Jesus and Mary and Martha, I don't know how the word traveled, if they sent a note, word of mouth, I don't know how it got there, but if they'd have been texting, Jesus, Lazarus is sick, get over here. Be there in a couple of days, text back. What? Big old, big-eyed, open-mouthed emoji on the screen. What do you mean 2 days? That makes no logical sense. You need to come now, because in 2 days it does not look good. In 2 days he may not be here. Frankly, in 1 day he may not be here, so we don't know. Get over here now. It doesn't always make sense what God is doing. And logically, it doesn't look like it's going to work out so well. But if we really trust his way, it gets a little easier to accept what we don't know. Greg Barstead was in our small group a couple years ago. We were talking about a situation like this, and he said something really profound that I thought has always stuck with me, and I've thought about it quite a bit. He said, notice that everybody that Jesus healed and resurrected and prayed for still died. At some point in Lazarus' life, even after his resurrection, he still died. At some point in the life of every person that Jesus healed and resurrected, he stopped and said, no, I'm not going to continue to heal and resurrected. No one lives forever on this earth. God doesn't just continue to resurrect people after they die. And they die again and resurrect them and die again and resurrect them. At some point, everybody dies. At some point, God says, stop. At some point, God says, no. We understand that when you're in your late 80s, 90s, 100 years old, and you get sick and you die. That makes sense. But he still says no. At some point, we're going to have to accept the no. We're going to have to accept the answer that we don't like. We're going to have to trust that God's got a better plan. Even when we can't see that God's plan is better, will you still trust that it is? That's hard to do. Why wouldn't we want a young father and husband to be healed? Why wouldn't we want Alex talking and seizure-free? Why not, God? It sounds really good to me. But God still says no, and day 5,841, no. Okay, then the only thing that's keeping me from getting really ticked off about it is the fact that I'm hoping and praying and believing that you have something better in store, and you're going to do something different than I can imagine. Trusting you, God. And somehow, some way, the more I trust, the more no becomes okay. The more no becomes something I can accept. the more no becomes something I'm willing to swallow. What has God told you about where he said no? If I was to ask you today, raise your hand if you've heard God say no to you. Many hands in this room would go up. You've been told no. Now, I'm not saying that he won't do something that honors him. I've never heard him say no to something that would please him or bless him or honor him. Talking about a question or a plea or a cry or a prayer when he says no. Or maybe not now. How do you handle that? What do you need to trust God with right now? And he's saying no to you right now. I don't know what it is. I'm just encouraging you to see that through these two stories, God's best was still in place. God was still planning to do something that we can't always understand or accept, but is still for his best for us and his best for him. Are you willing to say, okay, God, if I really trust you, then I'll let your no become okay. Or I'll become okay with your no. Every one of us has a question, a request, a prayer, a hope. I don't know what's going on in your lives today. I don't know what no's you're hearing. I don't know why God has said no or not yet. Those are the answers to questions I don't know. I don't know what's rattling in your head. You're saying, God, why won't you fix this or why won't you answer this? It doesn't make sense. It seems like it would be better if you did. Logically, it makes sense to me. And I've often known that God says, it may make sense to you, but it's not what I have in store for you. Are you willing to say to God, okay, if I really trust you, even if it looks really bad, even if it looks like Lazarus is going to die, and he probably will, and yes, he did, do you still trust me? That I can take and do something better for you and give you your best? I don't know if I'm really okay with letting go of control, truly surrendering to him, but it's something we're learning together. And when we can say to God, okay, you've said no, and I'll wait, that's when God begins to really act on our behalf with his best for us. As we pray today, I would encourage you just to talk to God yourself. And ask him and tell him, Lord, I'm confused by this. I'm frustrated by this. I don't like this answer. I don't know what you have for me. I don't know what the outcome's going to look like. I don't know what to do. I'm not ready to wait. I've got all these things I've got in front of me. I've got to have an answer, Lord, and I don't know how to handle an answer that is no or not yet. Would you help me? I think that's a really honest prayer when God says no. Let's pray. Lord, I don't know every person in this room, but you do. I don't know every mind or every heart in this room, but you do. I don't know every prayer in this place, but you do. And so you know every person has a request before you, and they're asking for something. And they have a desired outcome. Would you help us be praying for your outcome, even if it doesn't match what we want? Would you bring peace and trust and comfort in when it doesn't match what we want? Would you give us confidence to be anticipating your answer when it doesn't match what we ask for? And would you give us steadiness and not panic when your answer is no or not yet? God, there are people here who are struggling because you've told them no or not yet, or they haven't heard a thing and they don't know what to do. Would you flood them with steadiness and calmness and quietness, and take away restlessness and anxiousness and panic? Help us not to jump the gun and do something because we don't like the answer, Lord. Help us to trust you. Help us to follow you. Help us to obey you and count on you, even when the answer is no, even when the answer is not what we want. I pray that we still rely on you and count on you and expect you to continue to act on what's best for us and what will glorify you. In Jesus' name.